Բարեզես հարգելի բարեկամներ, Սփյուռքի ձայնը հեռուստահանդեսը դարձյալ ձեզ հետ է։ Վերջերս հայ բարեգործական ընդհանուր միության նախաձեռնությամբ հանդիպում էր կազմակերպվել դոկտոր Ջորջ Բուրնատյանի հետ, ներկայացնելով նրա գրական գործունեությունը։ Նույն օրը մենք հարցազրույց ունեցանք դոկտորի հետ, որը սիրով ուզում եմ այժմ հանձնել ձեր ուշադրությանը։
At AGBU's New York office took place a meeting with the historian-writer Dr. George Bournoutian, who presented his latest book, The 1823 Russian Survey of the Karabakh Province. During his informative lecture, Dr. Bournoutian spoke about the events during this period and about the distortion of facts from recent history of the region on the Azeri side. George Bournoutian is a senior professor of history at Iona College. He is the author of numerous books about Armenian history and has taught Armenian history at Columbia University, Tufts University, NYU, Rutgers, the University of Connecticut, Ramapo College, and Glendale Community College. He is currently the visiting professor of Armenian history at Columbia. George Bournoutian was born in Isfahan, Iran, and is an avid world traveler. He is fluent in 5 languages, including Persian, Russian, and Arabic. His 9th book, Armenians and Russia, 1626 through 1796, is a documentary recorded with annotated translation as well as commentary, biographical notes, appendix, and glossary. His lecture explored the ongoing academic battle over the disputed area of Nagorno-Karabakh. In presenting these translations with substantial commentary and supplemented with material from 3 other sources, Bournoutian is providing a necessary correction to various pseudo-scholarly behavior. Statesmen shall ultimately decide the validity of Armenian and Azeri claims in Karabakh, he writes. In the meantime, the works of these 19th century local historians should aid unbiased historians to sort out the facts. The lecture was concluded by a Q&A from the audience and a signing of his book.
Our guest today is Mr. George Bournoutian, who is author of a new book that's been recently published, and it's called The 1823 Russian Survey of the Karabakh Province. Before this interview, I had an opportunity to read and look into your book, and I must say that it's fascinating.
Thank you.
One of the reasons it's fascinating because it certainly has a tremendous historical significance. And second, from what I've learned, that the resources that's been used here are quite rare.
Correct.
And quite difficult to come about. What is this book about?
Actually, in 1806, the Russians made a treaty with the Khan of Karabakh. According to the treaty, Karabakh became a Russian protectorate, but the Khan was allowed to keep his position and to collect all the taxes, but he swore loyalty to the Russian emperor. A few months later, the Khan reneged and tried at night to run away and to join the Iranian army, which was advancing towards Karabakh. On the way, some Russian soldiers caught him and they killed him. His son, therefore, succeeded him. The Russians allowed his son to be the next Khan, and he remained there for over a dozen years until he also, in 1822, escaped to Iran. The Russians were tired of all these shenanigans, and they annexed Karabakh outright. This is late December 1822. Early 1823, the Russian commander of the Caucasus, General Yermolov, who was in Tiflis, sent 2 Russian, 1 counselor, 1 military man, to conduct a detailed survey of this province and all the taxes that were paid, because now the taxes would be going to Russia. And they spent 3.5 months interviewing all sorts of people, including the secretary of the last Khan, checking all the tax records. And they came up with this survey. And the importance of this survey is that it lists every village and every nomad camp in the entire large Karabakh province, which includes present-day Zangezur, by ethnic groups. So Armenian villages, Tatar villages, there was no such thing as Azerbaijani in those days, it was Tatar, and the nomadic, different nomads. Some were Kurds, some were Iranians, some were Turkic nomads. And they wrote this entire survey, and in April of 1823, they presented it to the Russian commander.
And so basically the significance of the fact that they did a survey per ethnicity gives us an exact account as to about Armenians.
Exactly, and that's
the key.
That's the key.
That's the key.
For us, Armenians. That's the key. For non-Armenian historians, the book is very important because it gives the 32 different taxes and all the officials and how a province which technically belonged to Iran, how this province functioned. But for us Armenians, of course, it's very important.
Give us some sense of the process, because why did you decide to write this book, number one? And my second question is, I'm more than sure it wasn't easy to have access to these resources.
For almost 20 years, I was aware of this survey. The survey was mentioned off and on, not in detail, that there was such a thing available or they had done it. I looked for it. I found a very bad copy in Yerevan, but it was extremely, the paper had disintegrated most of it, and when they Xeroxed it, it didn't come out very well. I heard there was a copy in Tiflis. There was a copy in Baku, they said, but obviously in the old days I did go to Baku very often, and they gave me everything in the old Soviet days. But of course nowadays they wouldn't. So I kept on looking for it. Then in 2003, I heard that Azerbaijan is republishing it. There were only 6 copies in the world. There was not one copy in the US. Not even the Library of Congress had a copy. All 6 copies were in the former Soviet Union: Baku, Tiflis, Yerevan, Petersburg, Moscow. That's what I was told, anyway, when we looked. In 2003, the Azeris decided to reprint it. I was ecstatic. I thought they would what they would do is they would just scan it, because that's how reprints are done of old books. In Russia now, they take the old books that are rare and they photocopy them with a new page, but it's the same book because there's no point of retyping everything or resetting everything. I borrowed a copy from Harvard. That's Harvard University, the only place I found it. And to my shock, I found out that instead of doing that, they had retyped the whole thing. I noticed that they removed certain things that having to do with Armenians. They completely deleted. So I continued searching, and 2010, last year, I found a copy in the former Lenin Library in Moscow. I had a very dear friend who went there, scanned the whole thing, perfect scanning, sent it to me on a diskette. And then when I got that and compared it to the Azeri version 2003, which I had copied, I realized certain things were, first it was very badly reproduced, certain things were missing, not on purpose, but they just, things were deleted from carelessness. And then certain major Armenian villages, the word Armenian was deleted. So then I realized that after reading also the introduction and all the anti-Armenian tirades, that the introduction says the same thing, Armenians were never in Karabakh. I completely refute that silly introduction, point by point, using the survey, not anything, no Armenian sources. I made sure in this book I use only one Armenian source, which was printed in 1868. So there are no Armenian sources, so nobody can say, well, Dr. Bournoutian is using biased Armenian sources from Yerevan. It's only Iranian sources, Russian sources, Azeri sources, their own sources, and the survey. And the survey was done 180 years ago when none of this nationalism was there. There was no reason to even suspect that the Russian surveyors had any bias towards Armenians or Tatars. All they were interested is the bottom line, how much taxes. And when you read the survey, you'll notice that that's their main thing. How much money will Russia gain from this province? Who pays it is not important.
And to come back to my first question, why this book?
Well, mainly because of the Azeris. Azeris are running around in the last, since 1988. Even Azeri academicians and scholars, of course, they're supported by their government. It's understandable that if they have to have a job, they'll do it in order to keep their job. They are truly running around and publishing all sorts of books in English and Russian, and publishing new editions of older works, which says there were Armenians there, taking the word Armenian out. So there was no Armenian kingdom in the Caucasus, although the first Armenian kingdom was in Artashat. They were never there. If there was any Armenian, which they don't mention, but what they try to say that if there was any Armenian presence, historical presence, it was in Eastern Turkey, which conveniently doesn't exist anymore. So Armenians, and this is, I'm serious, Armenians should not have a country. Not just Karabakh, even Yerevan, even the Armenian Republic today, the last two books that I've just gotten from Baku, say that even the Yerevan Republic was Azeri, that Armenians were nothing there. But that's how they are doing it. And all the introductions are in English, beautifully produced books, published in the thousands, sent free of charge, and one of them in London, the 3-volume magnificent work, I mean magnificent meaning production, with an English introduction, using Russian documents from Russian archives, selective documents, which they wanted, but even those are cut and deleted. 3 major volumes in a cardboard slipcase, selling for $275, printed in London, not by academics, by 5 Azeri businessmen who got these things, and they're giving it away free in the thousands.
How would you, as an author of this book, would want to see this book influence the argument, play a role in current political situations?
This is the first time that 6 years before Turkmenchai, in 1822, because the survey is 1823, but it's about 1822 taxes. 6 years before Turkmenchai, it clearly shows that the 5 Armenian mahals, the districts, and the map shows you, there's a map in the book, the 5 districts that comprise Nagorno-Karabakh today, or Artsakh today, Khachen, Jaraberd, Golestan, Dizak, and Varanda, had 165 Armenian villages, 2 Tatar villages, and no nomads. 96.7% of that area in 1822 was Armenian. I was just tired of so-called serious academics running around and making some very childish claims when the material is there.
First of all, thank you for writing this book. It's always very inspiring to see individuals like yourselves put in such tremendous amount of time and effort to add their voice to the general argument. And this brings me to my next question. What's in store for a future for you? Any other new projects? Are there new plans?
I try to work on material that involves Russian, Persian, and Armenian. Those are the 3 languages that I know well. So I try to find sources that have not been used, because not every person can do all 3. There are people who know Russian. In this book, for example, if you didn't know Persian, it wouldn't have worked. The 32 taxes are all in Persian, so one has to know the Persian language. Of course, the book was in Russian, so one has to know Russian. And there are some Armenian material there. So all my books, generally my books are primary sources that have never been translated in English. I have also regular books that are just without translation, 3 of those. But in the last few years, I've been doing translation of important books that are not available in English and are very rare. So the future generation, not just Armenians, but Russian students of Russian history in the United States, Armenian history, and Iranian history. I actually get much more emails from Iranian scholars thanking me, and Turkish scholars from Istanbul, thanking me for some of my primary sources of the 17th, 18th century that I have translated.
There you have it. The book is the 1823 Russian Survey of Karabakh Province. First of all, thank you very much for this interview.
Pleasure.
And read it. Read it. This is a good read. We certainly highly recommend. And maybe you can tell us, our audience, where they can find your book.
The book is available at all the Armenian bookstores in the U.S. Well, most of the Armenian bookstores in the U.S. are in California. So Abril, Sardarabad has it. The Armenian Diocese has it. The Armenian Prelacy has it. And of course, the best place to get it is from the AGBU, because AGBU has the largest facilities and they can ship it as fast as possible.
Thank you so much, and best of luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you very much for having me.